you're listening to Photofocus. I'm your host, Rich Harrington, and this is the July 15th edition. And today we are joined by my co-host, Scott Bourne.
Heidi-ho.
And we have a special guest today, Tamara Lackey.
Hello.
So welcome, guys. It's good to have you both here. And we're just going to start off the show by talking to Tamara a little bit and getting her story and some good advice for photographers that she'd like to share. Why don't we jump right in? Tamara, for those of us in our audience who don't know you quite well, can you tell folks just a little bit about your background with photography?
Sure. I have been photographing professionally for nearly a decade now, focused primarily on people. So portraits, lifestyle portraits, commercial, editorial. I have shot something like 250 weddings. I no longer shoot weddings for my own sanity's sake. And I have an associate-based studio out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where we do a lot of business in the local area and a lot of destination portraiture.
Great. So let's jump right in there and start actually with portraits, which is both something I know the two of you do a lot of. And portraits are one of those things that many photographers find tough. It's, for many, photography is a solo sport, getting out there, shooting landscapes or nature. But when you get into portrait photography, not only is it the technical aspects of the camera and everything else you're doing, but it's also the relationship you forge with your subject and the performance you essentially get out of them. What are some things you've learned as you've been doing this over the past decade that really stand out? Let's start with you, Tamara, and then Scott, I'd invite you to do the same question as well, actually.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, the connection aspect and the decision you make about interaction is a huge, significant, primary part of portraiture. And obviously, you need to know what to do to back it up technically to be able to capture a shot as it relates to lighting it well and framing it well and all that sort of thing. But the expression is king. And certainly as it relates to a lifestyle portraiture where you're really trying to show people in their element as authentically as possible, you need to get to a place where you can feel so connected with them. And that means a couple things. One, getting over your own awkwardness or uncomfortableness and submerging your ego in many respects and realizing that for the course of this portrait, it is about them. It's all about them.
Yeah. I think there's an old saying in portrait photography, Rich, expression over perfection. And that ties to what Tamara said in that you have to interact with people to be able to get genuine expressions or expressions that their family will recognize or that they'll appreciate. And there's a propensity, particularly on the part of new photographers, to hide behind the camera and fidget with the controls and stare down at the LCD, forgetting that there's a human being on the other side of them. And it's hard to get good expressions when you're hiding behind the camera. And there's another old saying, the camera looks both ways. One time a fellow brought me his portfolio and he said, I don't understand why none of my subjects ever smile. And he had this portfolio of about 12 very dour-looking portraits. And then I looked up at him and he had the same exact expression on his face.
Kind of like a mirror on the opposite side. Yeah, well, I can relate to all of this in that I've never been a portrait photographer, but I've done a lot of photojournalism, and it's definitely trying to capture people in their element. In our case with photojournalism, we're not really influencing what people look like in that environment, at least not intentionally, because, we're trying to let them have the emotion they'd naturally have. But obviously with portrait photography, it sounds like there's a big concern of trying to achieve something that the customer is going to be happy with. So to that end, how do you handle the difficulties you'll sometimes face with the client when maybe they're not happy with the portrait or, what the client says they would like the portrait to evoke, yet what you're getting from them? Tamara, any ways or tricks with the conversation to sort of, determine what the goal the client has in their mind or what the goal of the portrait should be?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I've never had a client ever be unhappy with anything I've ever done, ever.
The internet can tell when you lie, but that's okay.
I think going back to the idea of sometimes the client just doesn't even know what they want. They say, we want us just as ourselves. do me a favor and just get a bunch of unposed portraits of our family, for instance. And the truth is they don't want unposed because unposed can often look awkward and uncomfortable and disjointed and, compositionally slightly nightmarish. What they want is something that feels spirited and expressive and emotional and really, shows who they are. But you can show them in a way that's more pleasing by utilizing some of those skills we have in terms of how do you pose people in an unposed way. So when you're out there and you're in the midst of the shoot, a lot of times they're looking for you to provide guidance as to how to make them look natural. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think people are, it's always funny when people say they want to look unposed or they want to look natural, except if they wanted to look natural, they would take the iPhone out, wake up first thing in the morning and take a self-portrait. I mean, there's what we see in our mind's eye of how we look, and then there's like those unnatural portraits. You're like, oh, my stomach's hanging out. Oh, I look a little haggard. Oh, my eyes are puffy today. So I think when people say they want to look natural, what they're saying is please don't give me the glamour shots look from the mall, but there's probably something in between there.
Yeah, and they also are saying, I don't want to look like I'm posing for a picture, and most of the pictures that people take of me, I look like that, and I don't quite know what to do. So any guidance would be great. They don't say all that, but that is what they're kind of saying. And so what I always do is I start with styling the image in respect to making it look as promising as possible, and then I go in for expression last, and that very much is the interaction component. As long as I've got them to a certain place that I want them, I know I can bring out the look that is that natural expression, just in a more pleasing way.
Yeah, I work very hard on telling bad jokes, and by telling bad jokes, I get them relaxed. One of the things that's important to do is to sell the client on why you're doing what you're doing, and selling them in a way that matters to them, which is telling them what's in it for them. So I'll often say, be sure to keep your arms away from your waist because that makes you look heavy and you're not. Or be sure to cross your legs because that keeps you from looking heavy and you're not. They want to be reassured that they're going to look good, and they're concerned that they're not going to look good. Even stunningly, like internationally famously beautiful women like Tamara sometimes worry that they don't look good. So you have to do this with everybody, and you have to put them in the position to believe that you know what you're doing enough that you will make them look good. Because at the end of the day, when someone buys a portrait from you, they don't know the difference between a Tony Corbell portrait, a Rich Harrington portrait, and a Joe Schmo portrait. All they know is they want to look good.
Now, to that end, how do you guys feel about during the shoot? Some people are very uncomfortable letting the subject see the photos as they're taking them. I want to touch these up. I want to do things. I want to remove all the ones that didn't work before I show you the ones that did. Do you guys allow the client to see what's happening? Do you take them on the other side of the camera ever, or turn it around and let them look?
I do. I absolutely do. And I usually do it to reinforce to them that I'm not lying when I say, you look great right now. Let me show you what I mean. And I think that obviously, there's going to be additional elements with everything we do to finish a portrait and further stylize it. But in terms of the 2x3, whatever it is, image on the back, they're not going to really see a lot of that in that quick preview, and they're going to get a good feel in terms of being reinforced that, oh gosh, I do look amazing like this.
Yeah, I particularly do that. I do that if there's a mother-in-law involved.
That's the mother-in-law clause? Okay.
Yeah, I show it to the mother-in-law and make her happy. Then everybody goes on. If she's not happy, nobody in the set's going to be happy. So I find the mother-in-law and I say, look how beautiful she is. And she smiles, and then everybody relaxes, and then we go about our business.
Well, let's talk about building the relationship with folks and getting them to relax. For me, when I'm working with a subject, I do a lot of interviewing of folks, a lot of on-camera work for video, as well as some portrait photography. What I'm finding when I'm talking to folks is if I can establish the relationship before we show up for the shoot, a conference call, a quick phone call, checking in, or arriving a little bit early and just checking in before we start setting up, people often get all of that nervous energy out when you give them that chance to talk before they're in front of the lens. Do you, Tamara, start with folks and have an interview process ahead of time, or as you're selling the job? Is there anything that you like to do early on before you start shooting to just help put the client at ease?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think educating the client from the very beginning is huge, and setting the expectation for what we're about to experience and how we're going to experience it, and this is how I work, and this is why I like to work this way. That does exactly that. It puts everybody in the frame of mind for, okay, great, she's got this. I just get to go out and play. And especially when you're talking about family portraiture, which is very different than shooting models for editorial, for instance. With family portraiture, you need to help set the ground rules about, this is not a situation where we're going to be disciplining, and we're not going to, this isn't the normal 2 hours of your day. This is going to be pretty hands off, and let me tell you why. And so I think often just by setting things, up front and making sure it's very clear, you eliminate a lot of the common problems that people run into on a shoot. First and foremost. And second, you definitely get them comfortable and you get them bought in. And I will actually say, do you trust me? Do you believe me? Are we on board? And once you have that, you've kind of tackled a lot of the issues you'd otherwise be tackling during the shoot.
Anything that you do in the process? I know that you work with a lot of different subjects, Scott, and both people that are hiring you, models that you might hire for a particular shoot. Besides the joke telling and the good naturedness that you have, what are some things that you use just to establish trust that helps early on in a shoot?
Well, the two main things I do is I research my subject, and I think this applies to every single kind of photography there is. I don't care if you're talking portraits or landscapes or sports. You got to know your subject. So, yeah, I try to before they come in, I try to know everything I can about them. That's easy today. You can go to their Facebook page and their mom's name, their dad's name, their girlfriend's name. You find out that they're into guitars or whatever. And I use that to get myself on common ground with them. And I start a conversation with them. That's the second part, is I get on common ground. And so if they play guitar, I happen to have minored in guitar performance at college. So we start talking about guitar, and all of a sudden they just visibly relax. And then once I get them relaxed, it's easy to put them in the place I need them to go. I do this with professionals. I do this with amateurs. Even if I'm working with I've got to shoot Monday with a professional model in a sports car, and I'm finding out from one of her friends, where she likes to go hang out and what she likes to eat. And we're going to talk about her favorite restaurants in Las Vegas, because it turns out she's a real foodie, despite the fact she weighs about 88 pounds. And so, that'll help, her to see. And the other thing we aren't mentioning here, it's important for us to see them as humans, but it's also important for them to see us as humans. Mm-hmm. If we're just a camera to them, then they're not going to react to us the way we want them to. So if we have common ground, obviously anyone that meets me knows I'm a foodie, so that's going to work real well. And we can say, hey, do you know any great vegan restaurants in Las Vegas? Whatever.
There you go. I like it.
We'll do that one in for Tamara Lackey.
Yes. Well, that ties in nicely, though, and further emphasizes sort of one of my mantras about business, which is that people do business with people that they like when given a choice. And so if you want to pick up those referrals, if you want the client to come back, you want them to actually remember you as more than a Nikon camera, but the actual person who has tools and are using them, it probably behooves you to build that relationship. Now, let's switch gears just a little bit. Tamara, I know that you're doing a lot of workshops and working with folks. What are some of the things you're seeing as some of the biggest stumbling blocks for people that are moving into photography? I know we're seeing a huge influx in this economy of people who are saying, you know what, I really like photography. I've got some friends and family that seem to be willing to hire me for some things. Why don't I make a go of this? And there's a whole portrait photography is booming. And, obviously we live in a world where people are seeing pictures all the time and sharing them all the time. What are some of maybe the misperceptions or the biggest baggage that you're seeing emerging pros bringing with them as they're coming into the portrait photography business? And what would you do to maybe help them get past that?
Oh, yeah. It's a great question. And I have a very clear response to that, which is that part of the reason a lot of people are getting into photography right now, as we all know, is that the technology is becoming simpler. It's no longer as convoluted or difficult to learn photography as it would have been, say, 25 years ago. And as it's rapidly becoming more accessible, the barrier to entry into this profession is becoming lower. So more people who may have been on the fence are now jumping in. And there's a lot of upside to that, certainly. On the flip side, what is not changing and the barrier that is not lowering is how to run a smart, successful business and how to sell the work you produce. Any sort of business that you are running. And again, you're talking about, aspiring pros, people coming into it. Any sort of time that you are going to say, all right, I'm going to make something of this, whether this is a dedicated focused hobby or whatever it may be, if you want to be able to purchase more lenses and get more equipment and keep going, you need to fuel that revenue somehow. And that business is either creating goods and services or selling them. And that it's really that bare bones. You either have a good or a service to sell. And if you don't have that, you can't sell it. And if you have that stuff and you can't sell it, you can't stay in business. So the sales portion is the part that just is getting ignored as there's this influx of people coming in. We're going to see, a lot of these people hop right back out because you can't sustain that level of traction without being able to somehow produce more goods on an accelerated level. And you need revenue to do that.
Well, I think a lot of people forget that, they get into a business because they think this is fun. I enjoy doing this. And the funny part about all of that is, for many folks, turning what you love into a business could be the worst thing in the world because all of a sudden now it might not be fun and you have to do parts of it that you maybe avoided from before, like the billing or dealing with customers or taking all those extra steps. It's not all fun and games or just shooting. So I think that can be a challenge for some folks. Scott, maybe some things that stand out to you, and if you have any follow-up on this, I know that this is a topic you've covered a lot in the Going Pro series as well.
Yeah, well, sales is everything. Nothing happens till somebody sells something, Zig Ziglar once said. And that's really 80% of being a professional photographer, which is the part that the aspiring professional photographer does not want to hear from me, but it's the truth. I spend, still, after 3 decades, I spend 80% of my day selling. You spend 20% of your time shooting, 80% of your time selling. That's the ratio if you want to be successful. And, I always urge people to consider, not jumping into this full bore until they know they have the sales part worked out, like Tamara said. And if you're not a salesperson, hire one. Mm-hmm. There are plenty available, and there are lots of folks looking for jobs. So, but it's important to find a people person. I had a wedding and portrait practice. Everyone thinks of me as a bird photographer, but I'm old, so I've had many photo lifetimes. And in one of them, I was a wedding and portrait photographer. We shot hundreds of weddings. And the only reason we were successful is because I had a young woman working for me who loved love and who wanted to sit and spend 2 hours holding the bride's hand, asking her what her colors were and how they met and what the first date was like. And of course, every one of those conversations cost me brain cells.
I was going to say, I wouldn't see you having that conversation, Scott.
No. My first 8 weddings were horrible because I didn't know any of this. And I was just being the scientific tactician doing a great job at photography, and everyone hated me because I was being boss photographer. And then someone sat me down and explained it to me. I hired somebody who could do something I can't, and there's no shame in that. She took care of the rest of it. And then I was like a dentist. You go in the dentist's office, the dentist sees you for a second, he hands you over to the hygienist, he disappears, and you're being billed for his time, and he's doing that with 6 people. Well, that's the way I ran my wedding and portrait practice. I'd put young women in with all these girls that are getting married that wanted to talk for 2 hours about the color of their dress. I'd be back in the room doing Photoshop, and then I'd come out and do about an hour and a half at their actual wedding. The rest of the crew would do all the candids, and I'd get paid. It's, you have to set it up so that your personality matches with the skill set required, and you have to bring in the people who have the skill sets you don't. And nobody's good at everything. I mean, I know that in this day of the internet and everybody being raised to think they're special, that they think they can be an airline pilot because they're 16. It's not popular to say this, but you are not good at everything, no matter who you are. And there's no shame in admitting it. There's no shame in saying I need help. And there's no shame in hiring somebody who's good at what you're not. In fact, that just shows you're smart.
Well, Tamara, to that end, you've put together a team, and when you decided you were ready to do photography professionally, what were some of the hardest lessons learned in the first couple of years of your business, if you don't mind sharing? And we don't need all of them, but the ones that stand out that you go, you know what, if I would have known, or if I could save somebody else that same mistake, these are the things that I would have done differently.
Yeah, well, I mean, Scott touched right on it, doing everything yourself. Most small business owners start that way, and they think, well, why pay someone when I can do it? That's a very common mentality, and I still, I do one-on-one mentor sessions, and 95% of people will say, no, I know, when I can afford it, I'll hire somebody. And yet, it's chicken or the egg, right? Like you're never going to be able to afford it if you keep doing the same thing over and over again. That's kind of how you have to get started. So right there, and I fell into that same trap, even, quote unquote, knowing better, coming from a business background. I still kind of felt like, well, if I could do it, why bother? I could do QuickBooks, I can do, et cetera, et cetera. Just you can do it doesn't mean you should be doing it. And so that's the first thing right there. And then secondly is, not to beat a dead horse, but I avoided sales simply because, not because I didn't like sales, just because I'd done them for so long in my previous work life. And by doing that, it was a great detriment to my art, because sales builds a lot of confidence, and actually, seeing the work, seeing the reactions, having the one-on-ones and stuff like that, getting past the hurdle of feeling like you have to do everything remotely, or you just send it up to a website and wait for your order to come in, and further establish those client relationships and bring them to the next level will behoove you dramatically.
Actually, a perfect time, and that's a great segue. What are a couple of our show's sponsors that maybe could take some of those burdens off of some of the people that are trying to do everything themselves?
Well, we've got two right off the bat. Number one, you don't need to invest in a lot of equipment. In fact, I don't believe you should buy a single stinking piece of gear when you're first starting out. I think you should wait till you got a client and then rent the gear, charge it to the client. Borrowlenses.com would be a great place to go there. They've got every single thing you can think of, from lighting to cameras to lenses. Most people just think of them as cameras, lenses, but they've got some of the coolest lighting stuff, for instance, I've ever seen. If you want to experiment with lighting and you're embarrassed for people to not know you don't understand it, go rent some stuff from Borrow Lenses before you spend a lot of money on a kit. And then if you need help selling and sharing your work, SmugMug Pro is the way to go. SmugMug.com. You can click on the banner to either of these places, by the way, at Photofocus.com. SmugMug has got a system that lets you post your photos, share them, lets people buy them, lets them get printed and even framed and delivered, all in a one-stop click environment. You get the check later from SmugMug. They can be your salesman. So check out both those sites for some of the help that we're talking about.
Well, let's shift topics just a little bit here. And we talked about all the different things photographers have to do. We have two folks on the show today, both Scott and Tamara, who effectively use social media to connect with their audiences in different ways. Tamara, let's talk on your front. What are some of the social media tools that you find most helpful to stay engaged with customers?
I think with connecting with clients, most of that is done through Facebook, both my personal page and my fan page. Twitter tends to be very much engaging with the photography community and the industry, and just more of a general audience. And Instagram seems to be photographers from my experience. And Google Plus is more photographers and industry as well. It really does seem like there's a different audience based on where you go. And Pinterest is a lot of clients.
It's funny that you say that, because I got into a pretty fierce argument with someone who is very pro Google Plus. And I'm like, you're just talking to other photographers on Google Plus. You're not talking to clients. And they're like, no. I'm like, well, look, on Facebook, half of America is on Facebook. And in many other countries, the ratio is very similar, if not even higher now. That was last year. And the fact that you can, be sharing photos with customers, that they can easily take those images from your shoot, share them with their friends, their family, their colleagues, and some of the targeted advertising on there I find is pretty good. What are some ways that Facebook is helping you, that you utilize in your type of business?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook is an excellent way. Again, you're right that it's not just about the numbers and the followers and all that sort of stuff. It's about engagement. And on Facebook, there's a significant amount of engagement all the way around. You reach out, people reach out. Even if you don't even make a comment or they don't make a comment. The amount of times I show up for a shoot and I haven't seen somebody in a year and she knows everything about my life and I know a lot about hers, and it's not research. It's not sitting down and doing a ton of effort. It's simply just keeping up and genuinely, sincerely caring about what's going on in their lives. And just a note here and there can keep you connected for 365 days. That's amazing. That's really amazing.
I do like the passive intimacy that Facebook allows, meaning that there's no expectations. Like if I get really busy with work or something personal and I disappear for a month and then I suddenly connect back with somebody or pick up a conversation, there's not like we were in the middle of this. Facebook seems to allow for sort of pause play type conversation a little bit. Now, Scott, you have used social media quite effectively as well to pick up customers for some of your images. My understanding is that you have been using as a way to pull people into your blog to see your work, and then that's led to some good licensing. What are some things that you've really seen that have been quite effective as you've tried to utilize the net as a tool to improve your photography business?
Well, I have to first start by saying that my bias is that I think Twitter's the place to be, but that's for me. If I were in a retail photo environment like Tamara, I probably would have to have a Facebook account. Although I want to remind everybody what the original intent of Facebook was. It was so that people in college could meet each other and have sex. So I don't necessarily find it a great business environment, but it does seem to work for retail studios, particularly those targeting high school and college-aged women. Senior portraits, people do well on Facebook. People who are looking for brides do well on Facebook. But and I agree with all of Tamara's assessments in terms of generally who you're talking to in these various platforms. But there is a way to reach those same retail clients on Twitter if you understand how to use Twitter's extraordinarily powerful search features. And I've used this analogy several times in talks I've given. It's also in my new book, Going Pro. But let's say you're a wedding photographer and you're on Twitter, and everyone says, well, you can't use Twitter to sell wedding photography because you're going to reach people all over the world. But Twitter does allow you to search by zip code. So if you're a wedding photographer in Seattle, Washington, and you want to reach one of the most affluent zip codes in Seattle, 98335, which is the Gig Harbor suburb, then you can actually do a Twitter search on 98335 for the word wedding. And then you'll get a real-time, real stream of everybody in that zip code talking about wedding. Now, if somebody happens to mention a question about weddings, such as where should I get my cake or who's the best DJ, if you're in the wedding business, chances are you know the answer to that question. You've got a Twitter profile that includes a link to your portfolio. You just get on and be helpful and say, hey, Bob the DJ is the best DJ. That's who everybody goes to. And I like the Joe the cake maker. And you shut up. You don't say, and by the way, I'm a photographer if you need help. You don't need to, because you've been helpful. They'll check your profile. They'll see that you're a photographer. And if they need one, they'll look at you because you helped them. And if they don't, they'll refer you to their friends. And that's been a way that many of my clients have used Twitter very successfully on the retail photography side. It's through Twitter search, not just through hanging out on Twitter or not through broadcasting on Twitter, but rather going and trying to find people who need help. And all of social media, whether it's Google Plus, Facebook, whatever, The success comes from helping people, being generous. That's the one thing that I know. Otherwise, why would a fat old man like me have 120,000 followers?
Well, I think you both brought up interesting points, and for the people listening today, we're not saying one over the other, because it was quite what Scott was talking about that really stood out, is that using it as a research tool to find people within your geographic area that are needing services related to what you do or what you're targeting, and being helpful. And that obviously makes sense. I repeatedly find that people I'm engaging with happen to be just down the street or have a connection to someone in our area, and we're getting local referrals, even though it's an international stage. Tamara, one of the things that stood out from your comments, and I see the exact same thing, is for years I fought connecting to clients and everything. Facebook is personal. It's just personal. And I ended up splitting my account 3 ways into, I have one that's a friends and family account that has less than 100 people on it, and it says right on there will be no technology talk, and we must have had a minimum of 5 face-to-face meals to be connected on this account, and we don't talk tech. And that's just pure family, and that's when I need a moment to vent, or I want to just keep up on what's happening on my immediate family and closest friends. I see it. Then I have another that I keep below about 600-700 people, and those are professional colleagues, people that if we were at a cocktail reception, I would naturally gravitate towards and converse with and drop in and out of conversations with and share leads and opportunities and resources with each other. And then lastly, as you get to like where you both are, you do start to develop some fans because of the work you do. And if you are generous and sharing your knowledge like both of you are, invariably people will want to follow you and get news and information, except those same people, or at least a vocal minority of them, will jump down your throat as soon as you say something like, I'm taking the kids to see Brave this weekend. Well, why aren't you talking about photography? Because photography is not my entire life. It's just part of it, and I enjoy doing other things. So I think sometimes segmentation helps. What are some other things for you, Tamara, that have stood out as you have looked to gain new customers? What have been some of the most effective ways in growing your business? Some things that really stand out for you?
Well, certainly the idea of empowering your clients to share their enthusiasm about your work. And I put it that way because people cringe at the idea of asking for referrals or something. They kind of put it in the same category as prospecting or the dreaded idea of asking for the sale and such. But what that means is just saying, if you love the stuff, I would love for you to tell friends about it. And just simply that line gets your work tagged a lot more and shared a lot more, and more people come into your Facebook page. And I think the idea of tagging and sharing images is a kind of an okay, fine idea. Yes, it can work. But if you take it to the next level and combine it with genuine conversation of why that would be important for you, it can really branch out significantly for you.
You have the opportunity to use these tools pretty much any way you want. Mm-hmm. And it's up to you to decide what your goals are. I think that's the first step for everybody that we're talking to on this podcast. Decide how you want to use social media. Some of you want to use it to recruit employees. Some of you want to use it to recruit clients. Some of you want to use it to find education. Some of you want to find a girlfriend. I don't know. I mean, figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then set out down a path to make that happen. And I think having specific goals up front in how you're going to use social media are very important. I think that's where a lot of people fall down. They just sort of get up and do a scattergun approach. You have to know what it is you want to accomplish. And I think you're an example of that, Rich, in that you've broken up your accounts into different things because you have different goals. I have 2 different Twitter feeds that I run. One is for Photofocus, but I run another one for my car blog because I'm a car guy. But I don't mix the two because I'm pretty sure most people on the photography side don't care about my car hobby, and I'm pretty sure most people on the car side don't care about my photography. So I don't talk about one across the other, and I do think it's easier to focus on one topic. And I did learn very early on that talking about religion and politics are not good if you want to maintain any kind of audience, because you're going to polarize half of everybody's going to be, half of your people are going to be against you no matter what position you take. So it's best to leave that stuff out, unless that's your deal, in which case then you'll end up with all the people who agree with you, and all the people who don't will simply send you hate mail.
Yeah, and you run with it. Well, great. Tamara, let's just give folks a couple of ways that they can get in touch with you. I know you have a lot of resources online. There's a lot of web content you produce. Give our listeners a couple of ways that they can continue the relationship with you, go a little bit deeper, and keep learning from you.
Sure. Yeah, certainly my website houses all the ways to get in touch, which it's tamaralackey.com. That's with 3 A's. And on Twitter, Tamara Lackey, and on Facebook, it's Tamara Lackey Photography. That's the page. And then on the joint effort we're making on Adorama TV, Redefined Show, which kicks off next week. Woo! Season 2 for Season 2 Adorama TV, Redefined Show, which will be multiple conversations with a variety of experts in the field, will be at adoramatv.com.
Well, looking forward to that. And Scott, I'd like to thank you, Tamara, for joining us. We're going to take a quick announcement, a couple announcements from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back, Scott and I, just to go over a couple of pieces of news for some new gear that's come out, and we'll explore that in just a second. So, Tamara, thanks for joining us. Scott, why don't you take it away and just a quick mention of some of our sponsors.
Okay. Thanks, Tamara. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Over at viewbug.com, I'd like you to make aware of the photo contests that are going on, including one sponsored by Photofocus, which has more than $10,000 worth of prizes. There's no entry fee at all, and there's no attempt to grab your copyrights at all. In fact, you only have to give a license to use your photo pretty much if you win. So check out viewbug.com. There's all kinds of other photo contests that you can enter there as well. And there's a banner on the site to click to get to that. And we're also sponsored by Amazon.com's photography store. If you're interested in gear, you can click on that link, and you won't pay a single cent more than you pay if you got it from Amazon, but you will help support the efforts that we put into running this podcast every 10 days, as well as the Photofocus site, which Rich and I both contribute to 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Scott, I wanted to talk to you just for a moment because you are going to make some people jealous, but I think you're actually going to be generous and share your knowledge. You have the camera that everybody wants who isn't blessed enough to be shooting for the Olympics.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I fear for my life when I'm in public with this thing. I've got one of the few 1DXs in the United States. I got it the first day they shipped here, thanks to my pals at Adorama. Just about every other 1DX that's not in Japan is in England for the Olympics. And after the Olympics, Canon is going to open up availability worldwide, but they're not going to be a flood of them available. They're going to be on back order for a while. But boy, oh boy, what a camera! It's I've only had it for a few days, Rich, but I'll tell you what, it's really quite a piece of kit, as they would say in the UK. It is the replacement for both Canon's full frame camera and their sports camera, which is a very unusual move. They replaced 2 cameras with 1. It's their new flagship body, and some of the highlights are 2 CF cards. Yay! Yay!
Although I kind of admit I've gotten spoiled. I like having a CF and an SD card slot on some, but the double slot is awesome. I imagine that has the ability to back up redundantly as you're shooting, that it can make a copy to the other slot.
And that's why you don't want an SD card, because SD cards are slower, and if you're having to wait on it to back up to the SD card, it can't back up as fast as it can to the CF card. And despite the fact also that the SD cards are flimsy, easy to break, easy to lose, I hate them. Never mind.
Putting it aside, the benefit of the 2 slots for those who aren't thinking about it is sort of twofold. You could have one roll over to the other. So if you are going to be in a shooting situation where you don't want to have to, oh my gosh, I just lost the shot because of the rollover time. But I think that the greater benefit is in those situations where you need to be able to hand the card off to an assistant, or you need to be able to hand the card off maybe on set or in a photojournalism type situation or a sports situation that makes sense. I'll tell you this much. I already had this happen this morning in my own studio when I said to my assistant, so I need that card, you didn't give me that card to back up. Yes, I did. And we had to go on the drive and find it. And sure enough, it was backed up twice, but he was just having memory lapse this morning, which I don't get how a 40-year-old man has a better memory than a 22-year-old. It's like, shouldn't you have
well,
both?
it's because it's got nothing to do with memory. It's attention span. Anyway, let's keep going. Up to 14 frames per second. Rich, being a movie guy, you know that 24 frames per second is a movie. So in still mode, it's almost like a movie.
Now, how long can that sustain? Because the time lapse freak in me is thinking, are we going to be possible to start doing intervals of less than every second?
Well, I'll tell you, I haven't tested it fully, but I here's the thing: the normal frame rate is 12 frames a second. If you go into mirror lockup mode, it's 14. I haven't tested that extensively. I did it once just because I wanted to hear it go, but it sounds like a
Big Gatling gun
or something. It's really cool. But at 12 frames a second, it just went forever.
Wow. Yeah, I'd love to see that from a time-lapse point of view. And obviously, I was playing with a camera that was a bit slower last night. I was shooting at a concert, and I was just trying another camera out. I was just there for fun. And I'm like, boy, I'm really gotten spoiled with these faster frame rates. It's amazing how easy it is to miss the shot in those split moments. Now, what are some of the other standouts? I mean, first off, let's start with the big thing. What's this camera cost? What's this camera cost normal people? Not the black market, not the I want it tomorrow, so I'll pay the premium for it.
$6,900.
So it's like a motorcycle.
Yeah, I hate to say this is how old I am. $6,900. I think my first 5 cars cost less than that. It's expensive. That's one of the big knocks on this camera. This puppy is spent.
We're always known for value, Scott.
What's that?
Those Model Ts were always known for value.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I bought a brand new Camaro for $32.99 with 8-track tape player and AC, my friend. So that was a retail price out the door. So I am that old. And then I went and filled it up with 49-cent gas.
You're making me jealous.
I could have bought 2 of those for what this camera cost. And this is certainly not a camera for everybody because of that. What this camera is designed for, Rich, is for sports shooters, wildlife shooters, people do birds in flight, any fast-moving action, because the new 61-point autofocus system is stupendous. Those of you who are playing with the 5D Mark III have a sense of how good this new autofocus is, because the 5D Mark III autofocus is stunning, but on the 1DX, it's even better because they've added a separate Digic 4 processor just to work with the autofocus. So it's faster, it's more accurate than even the 5D Mark III, which is more accurate than any other Canon autofocus I've ever used. So you've got blazing fast autofocus, you've got 12 to 14 frames a second, you've got a full frame sensor, which is very unusual on a sports camera. Usually they're a crop sensor of some kind. But you have a full frame sensor, so you can do all kinds of cool stuff with that. And for HDR shooters, you've got 7 exposures over like the entire dynamic range of the camera with a press of 1 button. It's got an AEB bracketing system that allows up to 7 exposures. You can set the increments. And a trick that I tried already a couple days ago was I was down here in Vegas at the city center walking around with the camera, and I had the 24 to 70 on there, and I decided to do an HDR of my condo because I live in this condo called the Veer condo, and it's called Veer because it has a 5-degree angle to it, one juxtaposed against another, 2 towers right next to each other, and there were some clouds, which we rarely get in Vegas. I shot up between them, and I wanted to do an HDR, so I thought, well, I'll set the shutter speed pretty high and I'll put this thing at 12 frames a second and then I'll do a 5-shot burst, and I didn't need a tripod and the thing was rock solid. I didn't even need to use any kind of alignment software. It just held in place. It was that fast. So that's kind of an interesting use for it. It's got a lot of potential for people who want to do HDR work because it's got that builds right in. The metering system is fantastic. The color, the depth, the detail. There's about 12 stops of latitude in this camera. The only thing out there that's going to compete with that is the D4. They do have a new sort of de-lighting feature like the Nikon people are used to that they've applied to this, but it holds so much detail in RAW that I don't think it's necessary.
Now, speaking of RAW, what's the main RAW size? And then did Canon continue its option of offering different sizes of RAW in camera?
Yeah, it's a 14-bit file, so do the math. It's a 18 megapixel sensor, and there is a mini RAW available. I haven't gone in and sized everything. I haven't had that much time to actually do a lot of detailed tests. I've mostly just been playing with it, just getting used to the functions. There's a new command dial on the back. One nice thing is there's a dedicated video shoot button. They've also gotten rid of the 12-minute limit. So you don't have to worry about that.
The artificial limit that they imposed.
Actually, they didn't impose it. It was imposed by, I believe, the European Union. It had something to do with a tax that camera makers had to pay if files were recorded on a device longer than so many minutes. And that's really what caused it. It wasn't any particular camera brand's fault. But that's gone, and they just do it because the software seamlessly, technically shuts off and on in a nanosecond.
Yeah, and it just writes it. It spans to another clip, which is how people have been getting around that forever.
There's SMPTE time code in here, which I thought was very interesting.
And for those who are confused by that, that's just basically a unique number that describes each frame of video based on the time you record it, and it makes it a lot easier when you're editing if you move files from one drive to another, or you have to reconnect, so that your nicely edited video reconstitutes itself when you open it up on another machine and it doesn't become scrambled or slip out of sync. So that's a pro feature that's nice to see. Did they put any sort of Wi-Fi ability or tethering ability?
There's a 1 gigabit Ethernet port in there.
That's interesting. So you could tether via Ethernet on a laptop on a shoot while shooting?
And I gotta say, that while that at first I got a little blush of excitement about that, I thought, wait a minute, 1995 called and wants its Ethernet port.
Yeah, we are on 10 gig Ethernet now.
Well, I just think we ought to have a Wi-Fi port built in. Why not? I mean, if we're going to go that far, let's just do it all the way. But anyway, it's there, and it does make it easy to tether. There's a 3.5 mini jack for a microphone, but unless I'm missing it, I don't find any way to monitor the audio.
No, Canon's been leaving that out, and Nikon put that in, and that's one of my beefs with them, is they seem to think that it's enough to just record, but not actually know what you're recording or hear it. So,
well, I think what they really want to do is sell you a C300 Ridge.
Yeah, well, that's a conscious choice. That's a conscious admission. You know, they're like, we could take that out, and yeah, it lines in the sand of which product you have to buy.
Here's what I'm predicting is going to happen. Somebody's going to come up with a hack that turns the 3.5-inch jack into an in and an out, and then you'll be able to monitor.
And that's possible because you have that like on an iPhone where there are headphone microphone jacks if they would do it that way. All right, well, it sounds good. And when I'm out in Vegas, I'm going to steal that camera when you're not looking. So we're in good shape. Speaking of Vegas, you and I both have a show coming up there not too far off, right?
Yeah, if you buy your ticket by August 3rd, you save $100 for Photoshop World. Photoshop World happens twice a year, once in the East Coast and then in the September. It's always here in Vegas. It's at the Mandalay Bay. It's always a great show. And Rich, the thing I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 years in particular is the show has become very, very photocentric.
Oh, yeah. And actually, our guest from earlier in the show, Tamara, is going to be speaking there too this time.
That's right. And in the old days when you go to Photoshop World, I would sit there as a photographer and often feel like, well, geez, 2/3 of this stuff doesn't appeal to me because it was for designers and illustrators. But now it's sort of switched and it's about 2/3 photography, and all the best photo teachers are there. There's the show floor's got a shooting booth probably by one of the lighting companies. They usually have one. There's tons of pre-cons. Are you doing a pre-con?
Not this time. I'm bummed about that, but I'm thinking of sneaking off on pre-con day and either going on somebody else's pre-con or maybe going up to Valley of Fire and shooting some time-lapse up there. I had a great time there at NAB. So we might do an informal meetup for those who want to go up that way and shoot some time-lapse because it's just such a beautiful location. I had so much fun up there.
We'll also have a smug meeting at Photoshop World, and you'll be speaking there. And we'll even have some stuff going on for Photofocus listeners who are coming to Photoshop World who want to get together for a drink or something. So we're going to try to be very sociable. against our will. No, we're going to be.
I'm looking forward to some social time. It has been a hard summer with lots of work, so I'm going to be ready to kick it back by then.
Also want to mention real quick, Rich, that August 5th, I believe it is. I've still check at mei500.com. I'll be speaking at Skip's Summer School, and there's a big heavy-duty lineup there. That's in Chicago. So I'll be speaking at Skip's Summer School the first week of August. We'll be at Photoshop World first week of September. And then I think I'm going to Photokina later in the month. It's a Photokina year, and I haven't gone in like 20 years, and it's been a long time since I had bland German food. So,
do they let you in the country still?
Well, after my last bland German food joke, I'm not sure. When I get to the border, I get in trouble. But I have dreams about going for a sort of unphoto related reason, which is I want to take a Bugatti Veyron out on the Autobahn. So that's the real reason I'm going.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Well, that'll be good, and I'll actually have a bunch of pictures to share soon. I'm going to be taking a trip down to South America and doing some shooting down there, so I'll share those with our listeners when I get back. But sounds like a lot of good opportunities. I'm looking forward to seeing you face-to-face, and hopefully some of our listeners will be at Photoshop World or some of these other shows so we can catch up. Any other things you want folks to know about, Scott? Any other resources that we should mention other than, of course, head on over to the Photofocus website where there's new stories every day?
Well, you can follow, if you do not want to follow what I have to say about anything else, you can just follow the Photofocus Twitter feed. That's twitter.com/photofocus. And all that gets published there is simply a link to each new post. If you want to be reminded via Twitter, you can follow me on Scott Bourne if you want to hear other stuff, but it's still mostly all photo. And, Rich, how about you?
Well, I've got my own personal blog at Richard Harrington blog that people are welcome to check out. And I'll actually be doing a quick webinar next week on advanced color grading for video, but a lot of photographers might enjoy some of the techniques as well, and that's being put on along with Tiffin, so people could check that out if they'd like. I got details on my blog, and just follow me on social media at Red Pixel. I'm coming up on that first milestone, Scott, that you'll remember from oh so long ago for you. I'm coming up on the 10,000 threshold. Do you get a gold pin? Do you buy yourself a drink, or you don't remember? It's been so long.
It's been so long. I don't remember. We should point out that's RHEDPIXEL, not RED. And come on, if you're following me, folks, you ought to be following Rich. So, I mean, this guy's a wealth of knowledge. So follow Rich. Let's get him over 10,000. That's a personal goal for the Photofocus audience. Let's get Rich over 10,000 on Twitter. Get him off the schneid.
Thank you. I appreciate that. well, excellent. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's been great, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And we will be back in 10 more days with more stuff for you. So for Photofocus, this is Rich Harrington, and Scott, thanks for joining us.
Okay, see you later.